And that's the thing, outside of like a wanted poster, I think in Sonic Mania, there hasn't been hide nor hair of my boy Mighty here in games since Knuckles Chaotix in 1995. How mind-blowing is that? Especially considering he is basically Sonic the Hedgehog. He's arguably as important as Sonic, and yet no one knows who he is. Yeah, it's my boy Mighty. Sonic Mania. Plus? Okay, normally I don't review games that are less than a year old, but I had a full playthrough of this. I might as well use the footage. Besides, the game is about a year old. The DLC is new, so, loophole? Just bear in mind all the footage is of the DLC Encore mode and not of the base game. I will try and clarify some stuff as it comes up, though. Anyway, Sonic Mania is probably what I would consider to be the single greatest Sonic game since insert whatever you consider to be the last good Sonic game. I'll say Sonic Adventure 2, although that is not including the incredibly good Freedom Planet. Go play Freedom Planet, it's tremendous. I mean, I bought it 3 times, that's how good it was. But once you're done playing Freedom Planet, go get Sonic Mania because it's pretty damn good. The story follows Dr. Evo Eggman Robotnik, who's up to no good collecting the one magic Chaos Emerald that controls time or dimensions or something? Okay, just look at it this way. There's a magical MacGuffin, the villain has it, and now all those egg robos from the end of Sonic and Knuckles now have their own personality and agenda, and are also sub-bosses sometimes, maybe. Actually, I think the plot of this game ties into Sonic CD in some way, involving the small planet, which is why it's a very frequented location in this game. So it's nice that there's some tie-in to previous iterations of Sonic. That said, it does kind of come across in some ways as just fan service, which could be taken both positive and negative, and I can definitely see both sides of that being a problem and a benefit. Gameplay-wise, if you played the Genesis Sonic the Hedgehog games, well, you pretty much know exactly what to expect from this game. In the base game, you have 3 playable characters, Sonic, Knuckles, and Tails, and they basically play like they did on the Genesis. Sonic is the bland character no one ever played as because he's kind of the worst in his own series. Tails plays basically like Sonic, but can fly and swim for brief periods of time. And Knuckles plays like Sonic, except can glide, break walls, climb up walls, and in like the 1 degree it would ever be noticeable, jumps marginally less high. And with the DLC, it adds 2 more characters from Sega's roster of characters Sega really wants you to forget. Ray the Flying Squirrel, not seen since Sega Sonic the Hedgehog in the arcades, who plays kind of vaguely like Tails, except that instead of flying, he glides and has to contend with gravity, all while being vulnerable the entire time, making him probably the least good character in the game. As well as a personal favorite of mine, Mighty the Armadillo, who has incredible amounts of invulnerability towards spikes and other things because of his shell. Seriously. Position yourself properly and you can just take all the damage you want without ever taking any actual damage. He's kind of broken. But you know what? Considering he was basically the genesis for the design of Sonic the Hedgehog, I think he deserves something of a power-up over everyone else. Seriously, people need to recognize how awesome Mighty is. From a core mechanical standpoint, these 5 characters don't really play any differently. That said, each individual character has different advantages and disadvantages. Tails, Knuckles, and Ray can all sort of circumvent various obstacles by gliding and flying over them, whereas Knuckles and Mighty can basically just break through walls and stuff to get through, to find shortcuts and stuff, whereas Sonic has the most vanilla experience, which means he's gonna have the hardest time of it, except for maybe Ray, who is vulnerable at any moment, for whatever reason. Again, he's just kinda terrible. But the core mechanics of this game are very sound and once again rooted in the history of the Genesis games. In order to beat the game, you must get to the end of each stage and defeat a boss, as well as a mini-boss at the halfway point at the end of the first act of this stage. In between the end of a stage and the start, your overarching goal is to collect as many rings as possible, thus allowing you to survive taking damage, and, recollect your rings, thus giving you another hit of health, so to speak, as well as collecting shields, other power-ups, and provided you're really good at exploring, collecting the 7 magic Chaos Emeralds which imbue you with superpower to make the entire game basically a complete joke. Now, like I kind of said at the start, there are bits of this game that feel very fan servicey, and you can see that a lot with the progression of the game to a point, and then it gets a little bit muddled. The first stage is an homage to the very first Sonic game, the second stage an homage to the second game, and then it gets a little bit weird because suddenly you get a couple new stages that are completely unique to this game and are really fun, and then you get references to Sonic and Knuckles, and then later during the last quarter you get a Sonic 3 reference. Seriously, it feels like it's not sure if it's trying to be an homage to the games that came before or be its own unique thing, and even in the homage levels you can see this, because usually the first act of any stage, at least in terms of the classic levels, is very true to the design sensibilities of the level it's basically homaging. But then the second act takes the level in a completely different direction. For example, Chemical Plant Zone. It starts out basically being a complete copy-paste of Chemical Plant Zone from Sonic 2. But then in the second half, well, suddenly you're mixing chemicals and creating trampolines and stuff, and it's genuinely interesting. But then you look back at the first act and it just feels kind of disjointed. Oh yeah, we got all these neat new mechanics and design ideas, but then we're shackling ourselves to the old design sensibilities. It feels almost schizophrenic in terms of tone. And in fact, it's the parts that try and shackle itself down to classic design sensibilities that make me really dislike this game. For example, the boss of Chemical Plant Zone is Dr. Robotnik brand Puyo Puyo, which sucked back then. It sucks now, even though it's designed to be a lot dumber and more fair and easier to beat. As someone who hated that game and was terrible at it, I still hate it and am still terrible at it. Later on, you have to play through Flying Battery Zone from Sonic and Knuckles, except it feels even longer in this game, and even if it wasn't, that level was never good to begin with. And that level gets even worse if you're playing the Encore mode of the DLC, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But then you've got like this giant media area that's basically like some kind of weird technological TV studio. And then you've got levels like Press Garden Zone, which might very well be quite possibly the coolest stage in Sonic history, because half the level plays like this internal sort of dreary printing press building, and then once you actually get to the second half and you get outside, it completely changes and it's just amazing. The only problem I have with the new levels, seriously, only problem, is the last stage is ridiculously long. Aside from that, the new stages are amazing. And it's only when it tries to be the classic stages that it really feels underwhelming. And that's the thing, if this game had just been completely its own unique set of levels and stuff, or already existing levels, I think it would have worked a lot better, but as it stands, it just doesn't quite gel properly. And some of these levels, especially in the case of Flying Battery and the final level of the game, when you're playing it with the DLC, with its special Encore mode, it actually gets a lot harder with the new mechanics introduced, because this Encore mode essentially takes mechanical inspiration from Sonic Heroes, which sounds terrible when I say that out loud, but it's actually not too bad. Essentially, you run around collecting different characters to add to your roster, and by collecting specific item boxes, you can swap through them. But that said, if you don't want to, you don't really have to either. But what's weird about this mode is there's not really any lives. Basically, if you die, you just swap to your next character, which doesn't sound too bad, but if you run into a situation where you, say, fall off the environment, or, say, run out of characters, well, best case scenario, you're starting the level over. Worst case scenario, well, you're basically starting the entire game over because you accidentally didn't continue. Now, the nice thing is you can collect continues in this mode through what I affectionately like to call bad pinball, but bad pinball is bad. Sonic Pinball Party, this ain't. It's not even Sonic Spinball on the Genesis. It's just awkward. But you know, vanilla or DLC included, you do have a fair number of levels, and while they have a little bit of a weird tone and feel a little inconsistent with one another, there's still a lot of game here to enjoy. And you know, the platforming works well. Each of the characters plays somewhat differently and gives you your own unique experience with each character. So I'd like to think if you enjoy 2D platformers gameplay-wise, there's going to at the very least be enough here to at least give you some kind of enjoyable experience. Now the presentation to Sonic Mania / Plus is pretty tremendous. Visually, all the sprites look pretty spot on. Sure, they're not exactly the sprites from the Genesis. I could point out Sonic's sprite looks way too bright to be one of the Genesis sprites and stuff, but you know, they look fine. There's nothing really wrong with that. They reuse some of the old assets from the games like they do some of the level concepts, but they don't feel out of place in any way, shape, or form. And the updates they do make to existing levels and stuff are, for the most part, functional and rarely feel entirely out of place. And there's always going to be lots of throwbacks, such as the fact that all the special stages look like they take the same 3D model designs from the Sega Saturn version of Sonic 3D Blast. So if you're a fan of that game like I was, the Saturn version anyway, that's a nice little throwback. Blue Sphere is included in this game, so if you were a fan of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, there's going to be that sort of visual style there of, oh hey, these special stages, I recognize these, that's awesome. And again, there's visual consistency with the original games that the throwback levels meet, as well as nice little updates visually. And seriously, Press Garden is just possibly the coolest design in all of Sonic history. Because again, you start out in this like dank, little like printing press building, and then once you break outside, suddenly you see the stark contrast between the white snow and the bright pink trees, and you see the contrast between the internal buildings and the external, and it's just gorgeous. I freaking love that. Visually, this game is tremendous. Audio-wise, it's pretty much perfect for what you'd expect. Going back to the theme of reusing old school designs and then mixing in new twists, the first act of a throwback level is pretty much the exact song from that game, but once you get into the second act where things start getting changed and updated, they remix the soundtrack, which is really kind of a neat touch. That said, if I had one complaint about the audio design, it would be that while it reuses the theme of Stardust Speedway from Sonic CD, well, quite famously, there were two versions of that game's soundtrack, and this game takes the bad soundtrack. Seriously, North American soundtrack to Sonic CD, greater than symbol, Japanese soundtrack of Sonic CD. Bad Future Stardust Speedway is one of the best songs in Sonic, and to have taken the worst version of it, kind of disappointing. That said, the soundtrack is tremendous in pretty much all respects, either way. I mean, they've got the fantastic Hydro City zone, they have the classic Green Hill and Chemical Plant zone, and like I said about the level designs, it's the new stuff that really hits it out of the park. Studiopolis, Press Garden, Mirage Saloon, all tremendous, leading to a fantastic presentation. Now, if you want a copy of Sonic Mania, from what I'm seeing, it's about $20 to $30, and if you're buying the vanilla and the DLC is an extra $5, and I think it's worth it just for the, 2 extra modes, 2 extra characters, the fact that they are characters from Sonic's past that have been largely ignored up to this point. Seriously, the DLC is, for what it is, pretty affordable. The one thing I've heard people complain about is that it doesn't add any new levels or anything. All it does is basically recolor existing levels, and that is true, but still, I think the new mode is a different take on the entire game as a whole, and having played it for my Let's Play that you can go watch and the footage that I'm showing you here, it's a unique enough experience that I think it warrants a second playthrough. And ultimately, Sonic Mania is a weird beast. It's a fan-made Sonic game that was made official, and honestly, it's better than anything Sega could throw at us at this point, because, I mean, again, the last good official Sonic game, as far as I'm concerned, was Sonic Adventure 2, and even that game was fraught with many issues. But still, this game is good, and I think if you like Sonic, if you like 2D platformers, or if you're a fan of the old Genesis platformers, you should absolutely pick this up, as well as the excellent Freedom Planet, because that's basically more of the same, but seriously, just go play Freedom Planet, it's awesome. And then get Sonic Mania / Plus, because that too is just awesome platforming goodness. Because Sonic Mania / Plus and Freedom Planet both break the speed of fun. Oh, there was a character thing down there. Crap. It's alright, I just won't die ever. It's fine. It's totally fine. What boss is... Oh yeah, it's the spider that you have to... I remember this boss. They also showed this boss in the previous fight, kind of. Whoops. Oh, great. Okay, so I'm gonna die.